by penetrating Okinawan waters and airspace. And the conflict over sovereignty of the Senkaku-Daiyu Islands provides an excuse to maintain tensions for years to come. I'm sorry to say, friends, you're going to have to learn some geography in the coming months and years, because the U.S.-China struggle is now central, and some of these arcane, small, little, remote places are places where the struggle for resources and power are taking place. There is also China's growing military presence and exercises in the South China Sea, where it has competing territorial claims for the oil, gas, and mineral-rich seabeds with six nations, leading a number of ASEAN nations to turn to the United States to counter Chinese power. Yesterday, you could read that the Philippines was sending its largest naval vessel into the South China Sea to reassert its territorial rights. Their biggest maritime ship is a World War II destroyer. Vietnam has even begun discussions about who would be drafted should there be renewed war with China. Remember, there was a 1978 war when China went into discipline Vietnam over its ambitions in Cambodia. The rift between the United States and China became serious with the undiplomatic elbows thrown at the Copenhagen Climate Summit. Since then, differences over monetary and trade policies, over cybersecurity, U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, and President Obama's meeting with the Dalai Lama have made things worse. And just to say parenthetically, I've got a great story about the Dalai Lama and his support for India's nuclear weapons program. We can do it in Q&A if you want. These events have been followed by a deeper military chill. Rear Admiral Guan Yofei's, quote, biting lecture on American hegemony in the first strategic and economic dialogue with the United States, and the sharp exchange between Secretary Gates and General Ma Zhaotan at last year's Shangri-La conference were experienced by Washington as unexpected and unwelcome challenges to the respect that the hegemon believes is its due. And the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, as you saw, chose to unveil its postmodern jet fighter on the eve of Secretary Gates's pre-summit confidence-building meeting in Beijing, an assertion that the Chinese military is certainly going to defend what it understands as China's interests. I'll close with a few words about missile defenses, which, as you heard earlier, have roles in U.S. first-strike nuclear warfighting, and about Obama's nuclear weapons commitments. One of my first introductions to missile defenses in Asia came in 1998 when I interviewed Ezra Vogel on the eve of his departure for what was ostensibly an NGO meeting in Tokyo with his Japanese and Chinese peers. An NGO activist he wasn't. Vogel had served as the head of Asian intelligence in the State Department in the early 90s, and he was traveling along with his NGO colleague from the Pentagon, Joe Nye. What I asked Vogel was, what did he want to accomplish in these meetings? He answered, the creation of a new security structure in Asia. How, I asked, would you do that? And he said, by threatening to surround China with missile defenses that could, quote, completely neutralize China's military forces, end quote. And then he offered to make a deal. So I asked, what's the deal? And he answered that China adopt no more aggressive military doctrine than it already had, and that it deploy no more aggressive weapon systems than it already had. So I took that in, and I said, yeah, but that would leave hundreds of U.S. military bases and installations, the 7th Fleet, our nuclear-armed ICBMs, and the weaponization of space all in place and targeted on China. And he responded, so? So? China, of course, opted not to kowtow to Washington and not to accept a structure of power analogous to that which followed the Opium Wars. And just to, for the 5 minutes, I'm easy. But just to say that the chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, John Kerry, some of his family wealth derives from the Opium Wars. China, of course, as I said, is not kowtowing to Washington. It maintains what it describes as the minimum deterrent nuclear force of several hundred nuclear weapons. This compares to the 7,000 U.S. deployed nuclear weapons that are either deployed on alert or stockpiled for possible use. Another important function of missile defenses deployed in Korea and Japan and at sea is to protect the tens of thousands of U.S. warriors who ring North Korea, China, and Siberia. Let me say, Agneta talked about our soldiers, our troops, but we understand them better and see how the rest of the world understands them better if we refer to them as warriors. And that's how they conceive themselves. These bases have become increasingly vulnerable to short and intermediate range missiles. Missile defenses, if they ever work, are seen as one way to reinforce the U.S. as the Asian power that is so long claimed to be. On the subject of nuclear weapons policies, I think we should applaud Obama's declared commitment to creating a nuclear weapons-free world. And in the same way, I think we should appreciate the renewed inspection regime between Russia and the United States provided by the New START Treaty. But the price paid to win Republican votes for New START has to be condemned and opposed. They committed to spend $185 billion over the next decade to expand and modernize the U.S. nuclear weapons production infrastructure and to create what will essentially be new nuclear weapons. And people should understand that nuclear weapons were not last used against Nagasaki, but that during international crises and wars, the United States has prepared and threatened to initiate nuclear war at least 30 times since Nagasaki. And when you want to think about how power works in the world, remember that even the Obama administration has all options on the table as it deals with North Korea and Iran. One wonders why Iran might want to have a nuclear weapon. And as they say, the plan with this reinvigoration of the nuclear weapons infrastructure is to ensure that the nuclear weapons themselves and the doctrine can remain the cornerstone for the next 50 years. And this is the nature of the state that we live in.